One of the main things that we hear a lot about are standards. For example, like parents a lot of times will come to us and say, "Am I not allowed to have standards for my children anymore?" Because all of a sudden people are saying, "Don't add too much stress," or, just let them be who they want to be. And, these philosophies and ways to approach parenting. And for so many of the Asian parents we were working with, that just did not gel, right?
Okay.
So that's a big one that we see a lot. I
Yeah.
think another piece that we hear a lot about is I want to be able to have more conversations, honest conversations with my family, but I don't really know how to do that. It was never modeled to me. My parents never talked about feelings or ways of being. And so I don't really know how to do that, whether it's to my own children or sometimes for our, teenagers and young adults. They're still trying to bridge that gap with their
Mhm.
parents. And there's a big question mark of like, how do we do that? How do we make that happen? And how do we bridge that gap together?
Welcome to Tradition Breakers. I'm Mary Moses, former corporate executive turned creative entrepreneur. And each episode, I bring you an inspiring person or message to help more of us in the AAPI community break free from restrictive traditions that are preventing us from going after the life that we truly desire. Let's dive in. This episode is brought to you by Tasty Sounds, a company that I co own, which helps bring experiences and brands to life through music. Whether you're throwing a private event, producing a retreat, or building a brand from the ground up, sound matters. It sets the tone, stirs emotion, and stays with people long after the moment ends. Tasty Sounds delivers curated DJ sets, custom playlists, and full sonic branding, all built to elevate your experience and help your audience feel exactly how you want them to feel. We don't just play music, we shape how people connect with your story. So if you're a founder, creative director, or just someone who knows the power of good music, head to tastysoundsla.com to book a consultation. If you were raised by Asian parents with high expectations, you know the feeling, that anxiety ridden drive to achieve, the fear of disappointing them, the pressure that followed you everywhere. And now you're the parent, and you've made this quiet vow that your kid isn't going to feel that way. So you try gentle parenting, you try conscious parenting, you read the books, you do the work, and then you look up one day and think, am I raising an untamed slacker? Because somewhere between Tiger Mom and total freedom, there has to be a happy medium. And that's exactly what today's episode talks about. My guest is Dr. Michelle Chung, New York City based clinical psychologist and co founder of The Modern Asian Parent and The Modern Approach to Parenting. Michelle has built an approach that does something most parenting frameworks don't. It actually speaks to us, the AAPI community. It bridges the culture of discipline, achievement, and respect that we were raised with our own desire to raise kids who are emotionally aware, confident, and free from shame. The result is a way of parenting with both compassion and clarity, one that honors our legacy while building something new. Let's dive in. Michelle, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome to Tradition Breakers. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Thanks, Mary. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, not a problem. So, why don't we just get into it in terms of the questions?
Sure.
What inspired you and your business partner to want to create the modern Asian parent? And what were you seeing in Asian families that they were struggling with?
So, Mike, the co-founder that I, developed this nonprofit with, her name is Dr. She or Bersenberg, but we call her Dr. Laura. She and I were we're really fortunate where we're both clinical psychologists. We both work in New York City, and it just so happens that a lot of Asian families do seek us out because they're looking for Asian therapists to work with their either their children or for themselves. on the adult end. And Dr. Laura and I ended up splitting a lot of clients and families. So, for example, she might see a kid and I'll see an adult, or we'll see sibling pairs, or sometimes, the two married couples, she'll see one and I'll see the other. And over time, we just got into conversations about what are some things that we're seeing, some things that we're noticing. And then there were some real trends that she and I were both seeing
Mm.
in our work with these Asian families. And one of the main trends that we have been consistently asked by our clients is basically that these parents are really trying to find a way to raise their children that can still uphold certain traditional values and some things that they feel are really important. And then there are some ways in which they feel like there are some things they might want to do differently than their parents
Hmm.
have done. But, they would come to us and say, we tried gentle parenting, we tried this conscious parenting, or we read this book, and it just didn't resonate with how they felt they can actually be in their
Hmm.
family lives. And so we started to notice this trend come up over and over and over again. And we realized that there's a real gap in the parenting space for a culturally informed way to approach parenting. And so she and I put our heads together and we really started to look at, what are we seeing? What are the common threads? And we created, I guess in a way, it's a program,
Hmm.
and a way of approaching and looking at family life and parenting that is from a culturally informed lens.
Mm. To I have a question about that. Actually, too. You mentioned that the parents that you were seeing wanted to uphold certain traditional values that they grew up with. And then they also wanted to try more, I guess, like newer techniques, parenting techniques. Can you tell us what those two categories were that you were running into a lot with the parents?
Absolutely. So, I always say our parents, they did a lot of things right. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of ways in which, they really did push us in certain ways and valued certain aspects that have really helped us get to, who we are and, maybe certain successes. And there are some things that I think could be done a little differently, right? And one of the main things that we hear a lot about are standards. For example, like parents a lot of times will come to us and say, am I not allowed to have standards for my children anymore? Because all of a sudden people are saying don't add too much stress, or, just let them be who they want to be. And, these philosophies and ways to approach parenting. And for so many of the Asian parents we were working with, that just did not gel, right?
Right.
So that's a big one that we see a lot. I
Yeah.
think another piece that we hear a lot about is I want to be able to have more conversations, honest conversations with my family, but I don't really know how to do that. It was never modeled to me. My parents never talked about feelings or ways of being. And so I don't really know how to do that, whether it's to my own children or sometimes for our, teenagers and young adults. They're still trying to bridge that gap with their
Hmm.
parents. And there's a big question mark of like, how do we do that? How do we make that happen? And how do we bridge that gap together?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's great. I totally feel both of those because I'm I'm Asian, I'm Filipino, and it's important for my husband and I to expect my, we have a 10-year-old daughter, to expect our daughter to basically do her best, which aligns with what you were talking about when it comes to standards. And that doesn't mean always getting 100% or an A in everything. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that we expect you to show up at your best.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing, as she's growing up, sometimes it gets really hard to be in conversation with her in terms of getting more than like a, I don't know, answer.
Fine.
So,
It's fine.
yeah, that's fine. It was good, So I feel like I'm like your target market when it comes to this thing.
Right. And
It's
I think
amazing.
it's a really hard thing. I think a lot of parents are struggling with that, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a part of this that's like, I'm not saying all of us, but a lot of us were raised in a household where it's kind of like, you don't talk back. You don't,
Yes.
right? You don't
Yeah.
question authority. You do as you're told, and that's just kind of it. That's how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And our kids, frankly, they're living in a very different world,
Yes.
right? And, I remember, I think of this one story, but I remember when I was growing up, I was, or I am, an Asian person that didn't excel in math. It was not
Mm-hmm.
my forte, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a father who is a math whiz, right? I think he has like
Mm-hmm.
two master's degree in mathematical like related fields, right?
Mm-hmm.
It came so naturally to him. And one day he decided he's going to tutor me in math. He's going to teach me how to be, a math whiz. And so
Mm-hmm.
we sat down every night and we're going through math. And I have to say, it was the most unproductive thing I have ever done in my whole life because most of the time we were in some ways clashing heads, right?
Mm.
Whether it's, he's trying to teach me a certain way and I'm like, that's not the way my teacher taught me,
Yeah.
or sometimes I would get the right answer and then he would say, why is that the right answer? And I'm kind of like, why does it matter? I got the right answer. And I remember we would get into these situations where he would say to me, he would yell at me for something and then I would stay quiet because he's frustrated, he's angry now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he would turn around and be like, "Why aren't you saying anything?" Right? So then I'll say something and then it'll be like, "Don't talk back to me." So
Oh,
it was a lose-lose situation, right?
right. Right.
And I think, for our kids, we want something that's different, right? We
Mm-hmm.
want to be able to have discussions and conversations and to be able to talk about our inner feelings and, what's kind of happening in our lives. And in order for that to happen, we need to have a different set of rules.
Yeah. So how do you work with parents in giving them these set of rules? Are you more like sitting with the parent and the child together, or is there a book that people can pick up? Like how do we get this knowledge? How do parents get this knowledge from you and start to practice this?
So that's a great question. So there is a book that is in the works, which I am very
Hmm.
excited about. So right now it is with the editor and hopefully it will be published soon, but it'll be called The Modern Approach to Parenting.
Hmm.
Well, at least that's the organization that it'll come out of. There's a title might be different, but let's see. Write about these things and talk a lot about these things on either our Instagram account, which is The Modern Approach to Parenting,
Hmm.
or we have a Substack that you can find on our website, which is
Hmm.
again The Modern Approach to Parenting, that really talks about all of these things. And so every 2 weeks, we have an article that is directly related to, how do we have open conversations with our children?
Hmm.
How do we balance standards with emotional well-being and health?
Hmm.
All of these things that I think a lot of us are struggling with as these, a lot of us are children of immigrants, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as we're starting our own families and, trying to raise them in the United States or,
Hmm.
this modern world, there's a lot of different questions and new things that I think we have to learn as
I
parents.
agree. I agree. And one of the things that come up for me is this concept of tiger mom, in the Asian community, right? That's a stereotype that often gets thrown around because of a mom's strong focus on excellence. And a friend and I were actually talking about this and how she's like, I embrace that concept of tiger mom and I put my own spin on it. And so what do you think people misunderstand about that cultural value, and what do you also think is missing from traditional and new approaches when it comes to this idea of excellence?
So, a big thing that we speak about in the modern Asian parent and the modern approach to parenting is a lot of redefining success.
Hmm.
What does success look like? Are there different ways that success can look? Because I do think that's important. I think for
Hmm.
a lot of our immigrant parents, it was very much, there was a formula, right? You study hard, you do well, you get into a good college, that will lead you to a good job and therefore financial security and just security all around,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But as we know, that doesn't necessarily have to look that way. And success can be completely different. I mean, I think about these trailblazers in the Asian community, and I'm always rooting them on. People that
Mm-hmm.
have broken out of that mold, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many Michelin rated chefs now
Hmm.
that are, Asian, and I think about David Chang and Momofuku and all of his
Hmm.
lines, and he is incredibly successful,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Then you're even starting to see this in Hollywood.
Yeah, yeah. Ali Wong, Mindy Kaling, they're so successful.
So successful. I think I just saw just a few days ago that was it Michelle Yao got a Hollywood star on the Walk of Fame.
Perhaps I might have missed that one. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's who it was, but there's all of these different ways that success shows up now.
Hmm.
And so we really do urge our families to let's broaden that a bit.
Yes.
And the second thing that we urge our families to do, and actually we often have our families do this exercise, is really looking at your values as a family.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Because these values, they're your compass of how you're going to, what sort of decisions are you going to make, and how are you going to live your life and raise
Yep.
your family, right?
Yep.
If you think about the tiger mom and the traditional sense of what a tiger mom does, it absolutely leads to success in that
Hmm.
way,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I mean, even the author of the famous Tiger Mom book, Amy, was it Amy Chua is her name, I think. It's like Battle Hymns of the Tiger Mom or something
Yeah,
like that.
Amy Chua. You're right.
I mean, she's saying she embraces it, and I mean, her children are extremely successful.
It works.
It works. I will say it's not the only way to
Hmm.
get to that result. There are a lot of different ways that you can get to influence and to move and motivate your children towards success in whatever way that might look like in their life. That
Hmm.
doesn't have to be that tiger mom, path,
Right.
right?
Right. What comes up for me when you talk about values is as a couple, if and even if you're not together, but you're the parents, as the parents, you have to do the prep work of being clear about what those values are that you want to operate from,
Hmm.
right? So if that's unclear, it's going to be pretty difficult to parent your child and to choose what style is going to work for them and for you all as a family unit.
Absolutely. I think it's these family values are maybe even more important when you're
Hmm.
co-parenting from different homes or different perspectives, right?
Hmm.
They're being able to really align in those ways and
Hmm.
saying, this is what's most important to us. This is our
Hmm.
priority, and this is how we want to raise our children
Hmm.
is such an important message. And again, it is the compass, right? This is going to be your North Star of
Yeah.
the decisions you're going to make, how you're going to spend your time, your money, all of these things are really directed by those values and priorities.
Yeah, that's so key. How do you think, or what do you think about raising kids with these values of excellence and doing your best? without fear, shame, or emotional suppression? Like, how do you do that? I think I'm asking that because a lot of my childhood, there was a lot of guilt and shame around getting me to do things. And so I think for our audience and our listeners of API folks who do strive for excellence, there are also people who go against the grain. So it's, I think, going to be helpful for those parents who are listening to know how to encourage excellence without the fear and the shame and the guilt.
So I think this is a great question, and this is probably one of the hardest things because, especially shame and guilt,
Hmm.
I mean, they enter the picture in such in in sort of like these backdoor, underground ways that you might not even realize
Hmm.
initially. I mean, even in trying to make a point about something, say it's like too much screen time or something like that.
Right.
And if you just say, well, I noticed in so and so's family, Billy's family over there, they don't do screen time during the weekdays or whatever it might be.
Mm.
There
Comparison.
is a comparison.
Yeah.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
And you're not necessarily saying like, well, he got an A, why can't you get an A? It's not as blatant as that, but it
Right.
does the same thing. You're creating an environment and a setting where you're comparing your child to somebody
Yeah.
else.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that a lot of times that's where some of that shame and guilt also comes along as well, right? Now, the thing about shame and guilt, I just want to say this because I think it's important, is that guilt is a very natural emotion that needs to exist
Okay.
because it keeps us in check and in line with our values, right? It's a signal that's saying something is off here. This is not
Mm.
the type of person that I want to be. This is
Got it.
not, where I want to prioritize things, right?
Yeah.
That's where, and guilt also is there's a safety mechanism to guilt, right? It's kind
Okay.
of like if you go so against the grain, I think like evolutionary and biologically, there's a way in which guilt keeps you in check with
Hmm.
the bigger group, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So guilt is going to exist, it's going to be there, and I think when you feel it, it's important to pay attention to it and to notice
Hmm.
it because it's information. It's saying something is off here. Like let's
Right.
take a step back. Let's check in.
Is it sort of like your conscience or no?
Well, that's why they say it's a guilty conscience,
Oh, you're right.
right?
Okay. Okay.
So there's a lot of overlap there, right?
Yeah.
With guilt and a conscience, right? This
Yeah.
this is the thing that keeps you a good person, right? Or at least
Right.
the type of person that you want to be.
So is it detrimental when a parent uses guilt as a tool to get what he or she wants from the child then? Is that when it goes awry?
So I think using guilt is never great in general,
Mm-hmm.
and especially when it comes from a parent, because what happens is that it leads to shame, and shame is a little bit different because shame is an a thought or a feeling that I am innately bad or something is innately
Right.
wrong
Yeah.
with me. And
Right.
shame makes you want to hide,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because it's embarrassing, it's vulnerable. You don't want to show that side of you. And
Right.
so if you think about I think every kid, most kids really care about what their parents think. They don't want to disappoint their parents. They don't want to upset them in any way, right? They want to do good by their parents.
Yeah.
If a parent comes along and uses this guilt to get them to do something, that will oftentimes lead to that shame.
Mm. Okay.
I did something wrong because I'm not good enough, or
Yeah.
I'm not a good, um, I'm I'm innately a bad person or whatever it might be.
There's like an internalizing thing that's going on now. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're making it about their character and who they
Mm-hmm.
are as opposed to their behavior, which is really dangerous.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think also fear is similar to guilt in a sense where it does kind of signal something in you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's helped us, you know, through thousands of years, I guess, evolutionarily, right, to have fear because it tells us to move away from certain things or to not eat certain things as a species. So I think, like guilt, there's value
Mm-hmm.
in fear.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you as a parent uses that as a tool to incentivize your child just with fear, I think it could also lead to them just being like motivated by fear and not really by like interest or curiosity or love.
The way I put it, and you're spot on, you're absolutely right. The way I put it is that when you use fear as a tool, I think one, it affects your relationship with your child
Mm-hmm.
because you can't necessarily have the most open, honest, authentic relationship with somebody that you fear, right?
Right.
I think the second piece here is that fear oftentimes is brings the idea of if you don't do this, there's something bad that's going to happen,
Mm,
instead of the idea that if you do this, you gain this in life.
right. Positive reinforcement.
And it really is the difference between, I know a lot of parents, they talk about an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset.
Yes.
That is the foundations of where that mindset begins.
Okay. So how old does that usually start then? Like,
Ooh, it starts very early. It starts very early. I think if you think of it from its youngest versions, if a child does something wrong and then the parent acts annoyed or angry or mad or there's punishment involved,
yeah,
will the child learn it? Absolutely. You know,
right,
no one wants to get hurt or feel pain or punishment,
right,
but again, are there other ways that you can get that same result without having the negative effects of it being punishment or
right,
fear? And the answer
right.
is absolutely there is.
Okay. Is is punishment then necessary if you're able to focus on the abundance mindset then? Like instead of them being incentivized to not get punished, can they be incentivized to gain what they want? And is gaining what they want enough? Is punishment, are we able to remove punishment altogether?
So that's, I would say, almost the philosophical question there. But I will say this. I'm gonna back it up with science here.
Okay.
When there is a role for punishment,
Hmm.
right? Like, for example, if you get slapped with a DUI, driving while, under intoxication,
Right.
and you get caught, I mean, you will get punished, right? Your
Right.
license will be suspended or it gets taken away. I mean,
Yes.
there is a place for, things like that, for actions like that. And one of the reasons is by the human nature, if you ever want a behavior to change as quickly as possible, you basically want to punish, add something negative,
Hmm.
then you also want to add something positive or some sort of reward if they do the change. So it's like
Okay.
you have something to lose if you don't do it, and you also have something to gain if you do it.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so if you really want the quickest way for something to change, that's it. Punishment and reward.
So what does that look like? Can you give us an example of what that could be, like a scenario?
Sure. That could be something like hey, if you get, a C and below, or, whatever, below a C on your report card, that to me says maybe we need to focus more on school.
Hmm.
So we're going to have to eliminate some of your, after school activities or recreational activities. But if you get straight A's, I think it would be fantastic. And therefore, we can add an extra vacation on our
Got it.
roster or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's something to work for and to gain. But
Yeah.
then, hey, if you go below this expectation, there is something to lose.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very clear, right? That's what I like about it. And then follow through is also really important. If you're gonna tell your kid that they're not gonna be able to do their after school activities, then you can't go back on that
If
because
you
they're
go back
not gonna
on it,
learn.
oh my goodness, yes, that's the beginning of a pattern where you will not be able to have much influence,
Hmm.
on your children, because they need to know that what you say matters, that you mean business and that you will follow through. Otherwise, they don't really care about what you're going to say. Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't care what you're saying, is what you're telling them.
Mm-hmm.
What emotional or behavior patterns do you see most often in Asian kids and teens today when it comes to your work?
Yeah. I think the thing that, a lot of what brings people actually into my office is what I call two different forms of perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
The first kind is the very typical kind that you would think of, right? The person who tries to do everything well and wants to excel and, cares a lot and puts a lot of pressure on themselves. And then the other type I see is also a type of perfectionism, but very different. It's the kind that in a way freezes when they're met with any sort of anxiety or pressure, because the anxiety or pressure is so high and the stakes are so high, they actually avoid or freeze and therefore don't even try.
Mm, that's a big one.
And that,
What are your recommendations or tips for how to approach both of those situations as a parent?
I'm gonna, it really depends. And obviously, every situation's a little different. But
Mm-hmm.
if you have that, our jobs as parents is really to help balance our children out.
Okay.
That's the best way to put it. If you have a person, a child that is an overachiever and puts a lot of pressure on themselves, your job as their parent is to let's release some of that pressure,
Mm,
right? Let some of that gas out, right?
yeah.
If you have a child who is underperforming because they are so afraid of messing up or afraid of disappointing, or even some kids are afraid of just the amount of work it would take
Mm-hmm.
to feel okay. If you have that kid, your job as a parent would be, how do I motivate this kid
Mm,
to, how do I help him to take a little bit more of a chance? How do I help him to care a little bit more and to
right.
believe in himself or
Right.
herself, right? And so it's really about finding that balance, right? But there is one statement or approach that I think balances both pieces out, right? Which is, and I think when you're responding to your child, this is always, I think, one of the most important pieces. I think one is that it is okay when your child experiences stress sometimes, because that's how they learn to so many lessons, life
Mm,
lessons, when they're stressed out and learn to overcome things. Now, the stress has to be a manageable stress. I'm not saying like a burnout type of stress, but don't save them, right? Let them struggle. Let them figure out what are some coping strategies, what are some ways that I can problem solve. Let
yeah.
them build that confidence and that knowledge that they're a resourceful human being that can get through hard things,
That's a
right?
great one.
And when you see them struggle, the statement that you use is this: you validate their feelings because feelings matter, no matter what.
Yep.
And then you end it with an encouragement. So that might look like, I know this is really hard for you, and I know you're struggling with this assignment or, getting better at soccer or whatever it might be. I see you're trying really hard. So that's validation. Then the
Okay.
encouragement piece would be something like, I know that if you just try a little harder, or I know if we sit down together and we do this, we can solve it.
That's great.
And so it's really being able to put those two parts together almost in the same sentence that is
Yeah.
extremely important.
Yeah.
I see you, I acknowledge you. Yes, these are hard feelings, and I know you can do it.
Right. Yes. And I also sense this giving of support when
Mm-hmm.
you said if we do it together, as long as we do it together, we can figure it out. I like that a lot. Thank you. I'm going to use that.
Mm-hmm. I use it
Okay,
all the
so
time.
here's I think a very relevant question right now. How are phones, social media, and constant comparison affecting kids' mental health and sense of identity?
Big one. This is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I actually just did a panel earlier today that was all about social media and gamification on the phone and how it's been leading to gambling behaviors in.
Amongst kids? My gosh.
And so it's such a relevant topic, and I think bigger than we might even realize.
Yeah.
I think that there is no doubt that, and there's tons of research that shows this, that the way that phones work, the algorithms, all of the people that create these apps, they are fighting for your attention.
Mhm.
And frankly, as a high functioning adult, I can barely put the phone down sometimes at night.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have these underdeveloped brains in these kids. I feel like they don't even have a fighting chance,
I
right?
agree.
So absolutely, I think that the phones and especially social media is just changing the landscape of everything for
Mm-hmm.
our kids. I think everything from the comparison culture, I think from this idea that anybody and everyone can be instantly famous, right?
Ugh,
This external validation of how
yes.
many likes am I getting, all of these things.
Yeah, you need to be like a millionaire entrepreneur by the time you're 25.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. But this is their world and this is what they're surrounded by. This is what they hear about and they see on their social
Mm-hmm.
media feeds, right? And even this idea of like I know there's a lot of research looking at bullying, and when we were growing up, if you got bullied or had a bad day or did something stupid, it just kind of it stayed in that setting, and that was
Yes.
mainly it, right? Now we get it, whether it's bullying or making mistakes or whatever, it's just broadcasted to
Yeah.
quite literally the whole world
Yeah.
and could be there forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a way in which you can't escape it, and it feels like there's much less of a margin for error
Right.
in so much of what they do and how they act. And so no wonder why this is considered the anxious generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so what can parents do to protect their child? And I think as I'm asking that question, it's gonna go back to what your values are, right, as parents, because that's how you're gonna be able to decide, like, do we just not allow phones? Maybe you allow phones and maybe you just don't allow social media. What do you think?
So what I will say is that this is truly a kid by kid and family by family decision.
Hmm.
because I don't think there's really like a blanket, like this is bad for you.
Right.
I mean, I think there are some extremes where we know, okay, that's a little too much, but generally speaking, some kids are absolutely able to regulate themselves in terms of the
Hmm.
screen use, and eventually they just kind of get bored of it and then they want to move
Right.
on to other things. Some kids can spend hours and hours and hours on the screens,
Yes.
right? And so I think one, it's really important to
Hmm.
know your kid and use that to inform the decisions that you're making around
Right.
screen use and social media. I think the other piece is that, the family values, like you were saying, right? You know, sometimes, yes, sometimes it is what the kids are doing on the phones that are an issue. There's no doubt about it. But the other piece is, what are the kids missing out on by being on the phones?
Right. Yeah.
And that's the other piece, right? That is really tricky.
They could be missing out on friendships, right? Physical activity.
Creative outlets,
Hmm.
other hobbies. And this is where again the family values really come in, right? Are
Right.
you a family that does value physical activity and, being out in nature? Well, then if that's something that's really important to you, you might have to restrict some of the phone use more or the screen
Right.
use more, right?
Yeah.
But say you're a family that thinks AI is going to be the best thing and the kids need to understand it, you might have a different take on it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so I really do think that it does have to align with your family values and the type of kid that you have.
I agree. It's not a simple answer,
No,
right? It's not
it's not.
a blanket solution because I find so many parenting experts just say, don't give the child the phone, or don't give the child this. But I'm like, advantages and, positive things that can come from the phone. So I think what you're telling us, know your kid, right? Look at what you value is going to be super helpful when it
Absolutely. I
comes to
mean,
your decision.
I'll give you an example of I have a 12-year-old son and we have certain rules around screen use during the weekday versus and then it's different rules during the weekend.
Hmm.
And sometimes he does things that I find are sort of pointless, right? But it's what
Hmm.
he's interested in and he wants to do. So, we give him some time so that he can do that, right?
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
there are some other times where like he will go on the screens with a purpose. So like for example, if we're going to take a trip somewhere, I'll tell him research some things that you might be interested in doing when we get there.
I like that.
And and
Hmm.
that's what he's doing. He's reading blog sites, he's watching YouTube videos, and then he comes up with a list of things that he might be interested in doing when we get there or
Yeah.
he wants to see or whatever it might be. That to me is a good use of the
That's a
screen.
great use. That's how we use it as parents, is research,
Exactly.
right? To
Right.
help improve our lives and make our lives easier.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that. You touched on AI a little bit. So I have a question about AI. How do we help kids see AI as a tool that supports their learning or even their life, I guess, right? To increase, their quality of living as opposed to them, I guess, replacing their creativity. Yeah.
I do think that, I mean, this is such a nuanced and novel thing that I think we don't really know the impacts of it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I will say. I'm sure you've seen that there are some schools out there that are solely based on AI, and there's a lot
Oh, I
of,
haven't really.
yes,
Wow.
I think, is it called the Alpha School or something like that? There's a school out there that bases all their learning on AI, and then it basically tailors all the learning for their individual, and then allows more hours to do other things. That's their
Oh.
pull. And so, there's a lot of new ways that AI is being used and But I think this is the same whether it's AI or social media or phone use. I think the most important thing here is to teach our kids, like, in what ways can this be helpful and in what ways is it dangerous?
Yeah.
You
Are
know,
there, sorry, go ahead.
and maybe not even dangerous, it could just be detrimental, more like, right?
Yeah.
In what ways, for example, I mean, I definitely use, the AI chatbots sometimes, right?
Yeah.
If I'm looking for an article that I want to quote, or I don't want to spend timeless, hours citing, citations in APA format. I
Right.
mean, I can put it in there and say, hey, cite this article in APA format, and it will
Right.
make it all nice and clean with all the
There you
commas
go.
and the italics. And, I definitely use it,
Yeah.
but obviously our kids have developing brains. They haven't learned the skills that we have already established and learned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really about teaching them, hey, this in this way AI can be used and is helpful, but if you ask AI to write a whole paper on the Byzantine Empire, you know, that is a way in which it is not going to be helpful because that is,
Yeah.
you know, that's cutting off the skills that you need to develop and learn.
Right. Which are really important. Storytelling is such an important skill across
Mhm.
so many jobs, industries. It's one of the most important underrated tools in marketing because I'm in marketing, so that's like so important. And I was actually talking to a college student at UCLA 2 weeks ago, and she was telling me how in one of her classes, they don't even write papers anymore because her professor was,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, her professor was like, I'm just sick of just seeing all these papers like being written by AI, and it's very hard for her professor to manage that and kind of police that. So now it's just a lot of multiple choice or just yeah, those types of tests. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of like, what do you think about that? She goes, it's kind of sad because I liked writing and it was a social science class too. So it's really odd to have a class like that in that particular, subject arena and not have like a place for students to really just write, write what they're learning, write what their interpretations are based on these facts and
Mhm.
happenings. So I thought that was really interesting, and that kind of just made me curious as to how universities are going to be maybe changing in terms of how they teach and test and develop our students.
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah. Um, when you look at your own journey, this is going to be a bit more introspective of a question. When you look at your own journey, in what ways have you healed or broken from family patterns um, to become like your own version of a tradition breaker? Because you're not just like traditional parenting or, new age conscious parenting. You're like building a bridge between these two worlds, these two approaches. Yeah, and what have you done to even be able to do that, to accept those two worlds and create like a very integrated solution for parents?
It's a really good question. I will say one of those ways that I feel I have done that is by even choosing the career path that I have gone on.
Hmm.
I remember when I first told my parents that I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, they kind of looked at me like, what?
Mm,
You know, what does a clinical psychologist even do, right? And I mean, frankly, they weren't necessarily so supportive of my choice
hmm.
initially. And so, I think even in that, I mean, eventually they came around, thankfully. But I think it's really about like what are your what are your strengths? What are your child's strengths? And how do you as a parent foster that, right? And I think in terms of being a cycle breaker, I mean, I feel like we do that in so many ways every day, right? Um, whether sitting with our kids in a more emotional way, or
Yeah.
even allowing ourselves to be more vulnerable with our
Hmm.
kids, right? I know one of the big topics we talk a lot about is apologizing,
Yes.
right? And so this whole idea of I'm not saying none of us, but many of us, you know, didn't have never really experienced parents apologizing, right?
Hmm.
But we as cycle breakers know that sometimes we might need to do that.
Yeah.
And we might need to step in and say, hey, I didn't want to speak that way to you, or I didn't want to have that reaction, but I did, and I'm sorry. And so even those small ways, I think are ways in which, we all do that a little bit, or
Hmm.
at least we try to more and more.
Yeah. I agree. I uh I I try to I think it's important to do that because we're, at least for me, like I'm allowing my daughter to have permission to be imperfect when I do that. And I'm also showing her how important it is to own your mistakes and to address the person, take accountability, you know, um, for what it is that I did. And also beyond the apology, I think it's crucial to follow that up with a change in behavior in
Mm.
the future so that I'm not continuously apologizing for the same thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Accountability is such an important lesson to be able to teach our kids.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to another question
Hmm.
that I skipped over, but now I'm going to go back to it. A lot of us in the Asian American community, a lot of adults struggle with expressing their voice, their needs, their boundaries. If we as adults are struggling with that, what are some ways that we can make sure that we're teaching our kids to do that?
I think that is really a lesson that starts in the home.
Mm-hmm.
I think being able to create some space and curiosity around your child's perspective and experience is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Even when, if your child when your child makes a mistake or does something that you might disagree with, instead of approaching it with why did you do that, it's kind of like, hey, like what happened there?
Mm-hmm.
And so really being a little bit more curious rather than again kind of this negative, sort of slightly more shaming voice,
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
is really important, because then your child starts to learn people care about what I actually think
Right.
and what I have to say.
Mm.
Like
That's
my
so,
experience, my perspective, it matters.
yeah.
And so I really do think that that starts in the home, right? And then from there, I'm a big proponent of putting our kids out there to practice these skills, because this is also something that just doesn't really develop on its own, especially if you have more of an introverted child. It is something that needs to be practiced in order to feel more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So really putting your encouraging your child to be more in those spaces and flexing that particular muscle is
Mm-hmm.
something that I think is really important.
Social activities, maybe sports,
Performing
things like
arts,
that. Performing arts. Okay.
social activities for sure,
Mm-hmm.
speech and debate, for some of the
Mm-hmm.
older kids, whatever it might be, Model UN, certain things where they are encouraged to go out there and to put their thoughts out for other people to hear
Right.
is a part of that practice and getting a little bit more comfortable with that feeling.
That's a good one because it's going to be different for each child, like you mentioned, right? Depending on what they're interested in and where they gravitate to. Well, Michelle, this has been such a helpful and illuminating conversation. Is there anything that you want to share with us that you didn't get to touch on today? And that could be anything. It could be a thought, a concept, maybe some projects that you're working on.
Sure. I think, first, for all the people out there that are actually listening, I feel that it's amazing that you took this time and the space to learn more about this and the cycle breaking. Whether you're a child or a parent in this, that it really is a two-way street, and that in order to break the cycle, somebody has to start.
Mhm.
And so just commending everyone out there who's listening to this and taking that step to at least think about it and to learn about it. Cycle breaking is hard work.
Mhm.
It's hard work. So really being able to give yourself a pat on the back for doing that and taking these steps and being curious about it. At least we are, like I said, there's a nonprofit is the Modern Asian Parent and the Modern Approach to Parenting. We are continually doing webinars and a lot of educational type of public service types of announcements and workshops. So if you want to learn about that, you can definitely see it on our social media page, or our Substack will always have some information on that, and also our website. Just as an example, we've had some talks on things like how to be the best sports parent for your child.
Mhm.
How do you help your child get ready to bridge the summer to the beginning of the fall? We've definitely had some other talks about helping your child shine under pressure, because a lot of these kids do put a lot of pressure on themselves in one way or another. And so we've done a lot of these types of workshops, so look out for them if
Mhm.
this is something you want to learn a bit more about. And that's, I would say, and like I said, there's eventually a book that will be launched. So look out for that too.
Amazing. So I'll make sure that we put all of those links in the show notes so everyone can access Dr. Michelle Chung's resources. Those webinars sound really interesting. So I'm going to check them out too.
They're great. And the cool thing about those webinars is that there are people from all over the world that are joining them,
Ooh,
which is really
okay.
cool.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate your time and how generous you've been with all of your knowledge and information and experience. And I hope you listeners also learned a lot like I have. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.
Thank you,
Bye,
Mary.
everybody.
Bye.
If you like this episode, consider subscribing, sharing, and leaving a rating and review. Tradition Breakers is produced by Tasty Sounds, and the theme music is by DJ Professor Moses.